The champagne glass slipped from my hand, shattering against the polished marble floor of the Riverside Country Club. 200 guests turned their heads toward the sound, but their attention quickly shifted to something far more shocking than broken crystal. My brother Tyler's new bride, Amanda Rodriguez, had just dropped to one knee in her pristine white wedding gown, her head bowed low, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. General Carter, ma'am, it's an honor. The laughter that had been echoing through the reception hall for the past 10 minutes died instantly. My mother Patricia's face drained of color. Tyler stood frozen beside his bride, his mouth slightly open, the smug expression that had been plastered across his face moments earlier now replaced by pure confusion. And me? I stood there in my simple navy dress, the same woman they had been mocking just moments before, watching as every assumption they had made about my life crumbled in real time. But let me back up, because this story isn't really about a wedding. It's about 15 years of being treated like the family failure. 15 years of having my choices questioned, my sacrifices dismissed, and my service to our country reduced to nothing more than an embarrassing phase that my family preferred to forget. My name is Rebecca Thompson, though everyone calls me Becca. At 38 years old, I've spent the last 15 years serving in the United States Marine Corps, rising through the ranks to become a lieutenant colonel specializing in military logistics and base construction. I've overseen operations that kept thousands of soldiers fed, housed, and equipped in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. I've made split-second decisions that saved lives, managed budgets that would make Fortune 500 executives dizzy, and earned the respect of commanding officers who trusted me with responsibilities most people couldn't imagine. But none of that mattered to my family. To them, I was simply the daughter who had refused to join the family construction business, the sister who chose military barracks over boardrooms, the black sheep who traded Connecticut country club life for desert deployments and foreign bases. Tyler had always been the golden child. 3 years older than me, he slid effortlessly into the role our father Robert had carved out for him at Thompson Construction Company. While I was learning to lead Marines through combat zones, Tyler was learning to charm investors at charity galas. While I was ensuring supply lines stayed open under enemy fire, Tyler was ensuring profit margins stayed healthy under competitive pressure. The family saw his work as essential, mine as expendable. Our youngest brother Kevin had tried to stay neutral over the years, but even his silence spoke volumes. He ran a small coffee shop in downtown New Haven, having quietly opted out of both the family business and any real involvement in our ongoing tensions. Kevin was gentle where Tyler was aggressive, thoughtful where I was decisive, but most importantly, he was present where I had been absent. Because that's what my 15 years of service looked like to them. Absence. They didn't see the video calls I made from forward operating bases, checking in during holidays and birthdays despite 12-hour time differences. They didn't acknowledge the care packages I sent home, or the photographs I shared of the schools and hospitals our engineering teams had built in war-torn regions. They certainly didn't recognize the personal cost of missing family dinners, graduations, and yes, previous family weddings because duty called. My mother Patricia had perfected the art of passive-aggressive disappointment over the years. At family gatherings, she would introduce Tyler as our successful businessman and Kevin as our entrepreneur, while I was simply Rebecca who's been away. When people asked about my military service, she would quickly change the subject or offer vague responses about how I was finding myself overseas. The implication was always clear. My choices were seen as a prolonged adolescent rebellion rather than a meaningful career. The wedding planning had been particularly brutal. For months leading up to Tyler's big day, every conversation seemed designed to remind me of my outsider status. Patricia would call with updates about venue selections, catering choices, and guest arrangements, but always with the underlying message that my input wasn't needed or wanted. When I offered to help with costs, having saved substantially during my deployments, the offer was politely declined. When I suggested the Military Honor Guard perform a ceremony for Tyler, given his appreciation for tradition, the idea was dismissed as too much for their elegant affair. Tyler himself had grown increasingly distant as the wedding approached. Our phone conversations became shorter and more superficial. He stopped asking about my work, stopped sharing details about his life with Amanda, and seemed to view my upcoming leave time for his wedding as an inconvenience rather than a gesture of love. The message was becoming clear. I was invited out of obligation, not genuine desire for my presence. But what hurt most wasn't the exclusion from planning or the casual dismissals of my career. What cut deepest was the complete lack of curiosity about who I had become during my time away. They seemed determined to preserve their image of me as the rebellious 23-year-old who had walked away from the family business, refusing to acknowledge the woman I had grown into through years of leadership, sacrifice, and service. So when I walked into the Riverside Country Club that Saturday afternoon, wearing my best civilian dress and carrying a carefully chosen wedding gift, I knew I was entering enemy territory. I just didn't realize how brutal the battle would become before the evening was through. The ceremony itself had been beautiful and mercifully brief. Tyler and Amanda exchanged vows in the chapel with 200 guests watching, including several faces I didn't recognize, but who seemed to know exactly who I was based on their curious stares and whispered conversations. I sat in the third row, close enough to family but far enough to avoid being included in the immediate family photographs that followed. It was during the cocktail hour that the real trouble began. The reception area buzzed with conversation as guests mingled between the ceremony and dinner service. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over clusters of well-dressed friends and family, all holding champagne flutes and making polite small talk about the beautiful ceremony, the stunning venue, and how radiant Amanda looked in her designer gown. I stood near the bar, nursing a club soda and watching the careful choreography of social interaction that defined events like this. That's when I overheard the conversation that would change everything. Tyler was holding court near the ornate fireplace, surrounded by his college friends and business associates. His voice carried that particular tone of confidence that comes from being the center of attention at your own wedding, and he was clearly enjoying every moment of it. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping, but his voice had a way of carrying across rooms, especially when he'd had a few drinks. "You know, it's funny how families work," Tyler was saying, gesturing with his champagne glass. "Some people step up to responsibility, and others just run away from it." There was laughter from his circle, the kind that encouraged him to continue. "My sister Rebecca, for instance. She's here tonight, actually. Been playing soldier for 15 years now? While some of us stayed home to build something real." I felt my jaw tighten, but I remained perfectly still, my expression neutral. Years of military training had taught me how to control my reactions, how to absorb intelligence without revealing my position. I took another sip of my club soda and continued listening. Michael Stevens. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tyler's best man and longtime friend picked up the thread. "Wait, isn't she the one who missed your graduation? And your engagement party?" More laughter rippled through the group. "Oh, she's missed a lot more than that," Tyler replied, warming to his theme. "Missed Dad's birthday parties, missed Christmas mornings, missed pretty much every important family moment for the past decade and a half. But hey, she sends postcards from exotic locations, so that makes up for it, right?" The group chuckled appreciatively. I noticed several other guests had begun to gravitate toward Tyler's animated storytelling, drawn by the laughter and the obvious entertainment value. My mother, Patricia, appeared at the edge of the circle, not participating, but not stopping it either. Her silence spoke volumes. "The best part," Tyler continued, clearly emboldened by his growing audience, "is that she actually thinks what she's been doing overseas matters more than real work. Like building schools and hospitals here at home doesn't count unless you're doing it in some desert somewhere with a uniform on." His voice took on a mocking quality that I recognized from our childhood arguments. "She's got this whole hero complex thing going on. Very dramatic." Jennifer Collins, Amanda's maid of honor, looked slightly uncomfortable but didn't intervene. Several other guests exchanged glances, sensing the conversation was heading into uncomfortable territory but unsure how to redirect it. The social momentum was clearly with Tyler, though, and he showed no signs of stopping. "Don't get me wrong," he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I'm sure the military needs people who want to play dress-up and feel important. But let's be honest about what we're talking about here. She's basically been on a 15-year vacation from adult responsibility, funded by taxpayers, while the rest of us have been doing the actual work of building careers and supporting families. The laughter was getting louder now, and I could see more heads turning in our direction. Some guests looked genuinely amused by Tyler's performance, while others seemed uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. I remained motionless, my face carefully composed, but inside I was cataloging every word, every gesture, every laugh. Patricia finally spoke, her voice carrying just enough maternal authority to sound reasonable, while still supporting her son's narrative. Now, Tyler, your sister has had her own path. It's just been different from what we might have chosen for her. The diplomatic phrasing somehow made it worse than if she had been openly critical. Different is one word for it, Tyler said, emboldened by his mother's qualified support. Selfish is another, irresponsible works too. I mean, think about it. While I was here learning the business from Dad, building relationships, establishing myself in the community, Rebecca was off having adventures on the government's dime. No real commitments, no real consequences, no real stakes. Kevin appeared at my elbow, having approached so quietly I hadn't noticed him coming. His face was tight with embarrassment and concern. "Becca," he whispered, "maybe we should step outside for a minute." I shook my head almost imperceptibly, my eyes still fixed on Tyler's performance. Kevin understood immediately and remained beside me, a silent show of support that I appreciated more than he could know. Tyler was hitting his stride now, feeding off the energy of his audience. And the thing is, she actually expects us to be impressed by all this military stuff. Like, congratulations, you figured out how to follow orders for 15 years. Meanwhile, some of us were learning how to give them, how to build something, how to create jobs and contribute to the actual economy. Michael Stevens raised his glass. "To builders, not followers," he said with a grin. "To builders," Tyler echoed, and several people in the circle raised their glasses in response. The moment crystallized for me with perfect clarity. This wasn't just wedding day exuberance or alcohol-fueled bravado. This was a deliberate, calculated performance designed to humiliate me in front of extended family, friends, and business associates. Tyler had chosen his wedding day, surrounded by everyone who mattered to him, to publicly diminish my service and my sacrifices. I could feel Kevin's tension beside me, could sense his internal struggle between family loyalty and basic decency. I could see the faces in Tyler's audience, some genuinely entertained, others beginning to look uncomfortable as they realized they were witnessing something more personal and cruel than simple wedding reception humor. But what struck me most was the careful choreography of it all. Tyler had positioned himself near the fireplace where his voice would carry. He had waited until enough people had gathered, until the champagne had loosened tongues and lowered inhibitions. He had chosen his words carefully, mixing just enough humor with his cruelty to maintain plausible deniability. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. This was a planned assassination of my character, executed with the precision of a military operation. And that's when I realized something that changed my entire perspective on the evening. Tyler thought he was dealing with the same Rebecca who had left Connecticut 15 years ago, the young woman who might have been hurt by his words, who might have retreated or responded with emotion. He had no idea who I had become during those years of service, no understanding of the skills I had developed or the strength I had built. I set my club soda down on the nearest table with deliberate care. I straightened my shoulders and walked forward, my steps measured and purposeful. The crowd around Tyler noticed my approach first, their laughter fading as they registered the calm determination in my posture. Tyler continued talking for a few more seconds before the shifting attention of his audience made him turn around. When he saw me standing there, perfectly composed and utterly still, his confident smile faltered slightly. But he was committed now, surrounded by his supporters, performing for his wedding guests. He couldn't back down without losing face. "Rebecca," he said with exaggerated enthusiasm, "we were just talking about you. Come join us. I was telling everyone about your career choices." I looked at him for a long moment, my expression neutral, my voice when I spoke completely level. I heard. The simplicity of my response seemed to unnerve him slightly. He had been expecting defensiveness, anger, or embarrassment. Instead, he got 2 words delivered, with the kind of calm that comes from facing down much more dangerous opponents than a tipsy groom at his own wedding. "Well," Tyler said, his voice slightly less confident now, "since you're here, maybe you can settle a debate we were having. Michael here was asking about what you actually do over there, day to day. Because honestly, we're all a little unclear on the specifics." The circle of guests shifted uncomfortably. What had started as entertaining gossip was beginning to feel like a confrontation, and several people were clearly wishing they were somewhere else. But social momentum and curiosity kept them rooted in place. I looked around the circle slowly, meeting the eyes of each person present. When I spoke, my voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being listened to, someone whose words carried weight and consequence. "What I do," I said, pausing just long enough to ensure complete attention, "is classified." The silence that followed was profound. Tyler blinked, clearly not having expected that response. Several guests exchanged glances, suddenly aware that they might have stumbled into something more serious than family drama. But I wasn't finished. I had spent 15 years learning how to project calm under pressure, how to command respect without raising my voice, how to diffuse volatile situations through presence rather than force. Tyler had chosen to make this public. Now he would learn what that choice really meant. "Tyler," I said, my voice carrying just far enough to include the expanding circle of guests who had been drawn by the commotion, "I need to thank you for something." My brother's eyebrows shot up, clearly not expecting gratitude in this moment. The confusion on his face was almost comical, but I maintained my serious expression as I continued. "You've given me a gift tonight. You've shown me exactly who you are, and more importantly, you've shown everyone here who you are." I gestured slightly toward the assembled guests, many of whom were now paying close attention to our exchange. "That's valuable information." Tyler's confident smile was beginning to crack around the edges. He glanced at his audience, looking for support, but found faces that were increasingly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation was taking. What had started as entertaining mockery was transforming into something more serious, more personal, and definitely more awkward for everyone present. "I don't know what you're getting at, Rebecca, but this is my wedding day. Maybe we could save the family drama for another time." Tyler's voice carried a forced lightness, but I could hear the underlying tension. He was trying to regain control of the situation, to frame me as the unreasonable one disrupting his celebration. "Family drama," I repeated thoughtfully, as if considering the phrase. "Is that what you call it when you spend 15 minutes telling a room full of people that your sister's military service is meaningless? When you describe her sacrifices as selfishness and her dedication as playing dress-up?" The silence stretched longer this time. Several guests began studying their champagne glasses with sudden intensity, while others started quiet conversations with their companions about anything other than what was happening in front of them. Kevin moved closer to my side, his presence a small comfort in the growing tension. Patricia materialized at Tyler's shoulder, her expression tight with the kind of controlled panic that comes from realizing a social situation is spiraling beyond management. "Children," she said, using the tone that had once been effective when we were actually children, "this isn't the time or place for this discussion." "I disagree," I said, turning to include her in my steady gaze. "I think this is exactly the time and place. Tyler chose to make our family dynamics a public entertainment. He chose to use his wedding reception as a platform to diminish my service and my choices. So let's have that conversation he's been so eager to share." Tyler's face was beginning to show the first signs of real anger now, the kind that comes when someone realizes they've lost control of a situation they thought they were orchestrating. "You know what, Rebecca? Fine, let's have that conversation. You want to talk about service? Let's talk about service to family. Let's talk about being there when people need you, instead of running off to play hero halfway around the world." "Play hero," I repeated, my voice still level but with something harder underneath now. "Is that what you think I've been doing?" "Haven't you?" Tyler shot back, emboldened by what he mistook for defensiveness. "Come on, be honest. You joined the military because you couldn't handle real responsibility. You wanted someone else to tell you what to do, where to go, what to think. You wanted to avoid the hard work of actually building something meaningful. The crowd around us was growing larger now, drawn by the obvious conflict but trapped by social convention and curiosity. I could see Amanda across the room, deep in conversation with the wedding planner, but occasionally glancing in our direction with obvious concern. The bride was clearly aware that something was happening, but hadn't yet grasped the full scope of the confrontation. "Building something meaningful," I said, taking a small step forward. My movement was subtle, but it changed the dynamic of our interaction in a way that Tyler seemed to sense without fully understanding. "Tell me, Tyler, what have you built?" "Are you serious?" Tyler gestured broadly at the elegant reception hall, at the well-dressed guests, at the obvious wealth and success surrounding us. "I've built a business. I've created jobs. I've contributed to the community. I've stayed here and done the work while you've been off having adventures." "Adventures," I said, nodding thoughtfully. "Is that what you call 3 combat deployments? Adventures?" Tyler's face flushed slightly, but he pressed forward. "I call them excuses. Excuses for avoiding real commitment, real responsibility, real work. Anyone can follow orders, Rebecca. It takes actual talent and dedication to build something from nothing." The words hung in the air like a challenge. I could feel Kevin's tension beside me, could sense Patricia's growing alarm at the direction of the conversation, could see the faces of the guests as they realized they were witnessing something more significant than simple sibling rivalry. "Anyone can follow orders," I repeated slowly, as if testing the weight of the words. "That's interesting. Tell me, when was the last time you had to make a decision where people's lives depended on getting it right?" Tyler opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The question had clearly caught him off guard, and he seemed to be struggling to find a comeback that wouldn't sound foolish in front of his audience. I didn't wait for his answer. "When was the last time you had to lead people who were scared, exhausted, and far from home? When was the last time you had to take responsibility not just for profit margins and client satisfaction, but for whether the people under your command made it home alive?" "That's not..." Tyler started, but I continued. "When was the last time you had to rebuild infrastructure in a war zone? When was the last time you coordinated supply lines through hostile territory? When was the last time you managed a budget where mistakes didn't just cost money, they cost lives?" Each question landed with increasing weight. Tyler's confident posture was beginning to sag as he realized that his attack had opened a door he might not be prepared to walk through. "You want to talk about building something meaningful?" I continued, my voice still calm but now carrying an edge of steel that made several guests step back slightly. "I've built schools that are still standing in places where most people wouldn't dare to visit. I've built hospitals that have saved thousands of lives. I've built roads and bridges and water treatment facilities that have transformed entire communities." Tyler tried to interrupt, but I wasn't finished. "And yes, I've followed orders. But I've also given them. I've commanded units responsible for operations that most civilians can't even imagine. I've made decisions in minutes that affect more people than your business will touch in a decade. I've taken responsibility for outcomes that matter more than quarterly profits." The circle of guests had gone completely silent now. What had started as Tyler's entertainment at my expense had transformed into something else entirely. Several people were looking at him with expressions ranging from discomfort to outright disapproval. Patricia stepped forward, clearly recognizing that the situation was deteriorating rapidly from her son's perspective. "Rebecca, we understand that you've had important work to do, but Tyler's point is that family should come first. You've missed so many important moments." I turned to look at her directly, and for the first time that evening, I let some of my real emotion show in my voice. "You're right. I have missed moments. I missed Tyler's graduation because I was in Afghanistan, ensuring that a forward operating base had clean water and functioning generators. I missed Christmas mornings because I was coordinating supply convoys through areas where insurgents were targeting infrastructure. I missed birthday parties because I was rebuilding schools that had been destroyed by people who think education is dangerous." Patricia's face went pale as she realized that her attempt to support Tyler had only provided me with more ammunition. "But here's what I didn't miss," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "I didn't miss the opportunity to serve something larger than myself. I didn't miss the chance to use my skills and education to help people who had nothing. I didn't miss the responsibility that comes with real leadership under real pressure. Tyler was looking increasingly desperate now, clearly realizing that his wedding reception humiliation strategy had backfired spectacularly. But instead of backing down, he doubled down on his attack. "Oh, spare us the nobility speech, Rebecca. You can dress it up however you want, but at the end of the day, you abandoned your family. You chose strangers over blood. You chose glory over responsibility." That's when something shifted in my expression. Something that made Kevin instinctively step closer and caused several guests to take another step back. When I spoke again, my voice was quiet, but it carried the kind of authority that comes from absolute certainty. "Glory?" I said, and for the first time that evening, Tyler seemed to recognize that he had crossed a line he didn't even know existed. "You think this is about glory?" I reached into my small evening purse and pulled out my phone. With deliberate movements, I pulled up a photograph and held it out so Tyler and the nearest guests could see it clearly. "This is Sergeant Maria Gonzalez," I said. She was 22 years old when an improvised explosive device destroyed the convoy she was riding in. I held her hand while we waited for the medevac helicopter because both of her legs were gone, and she was asking me to tell her mother she was sorry for not coming home for Christmas. The silence was now complete and profound. Tyler's face had gone ashen, and several guests were openly staring at the phone in my hand. "This is what glory looks like," I continued, swiping to another photo. "This is Captain James Wilson. He died keeping a school full of children safe during a mortar attack. I wrote the letter to his wife explaining why her husband wouldn't be coming home to meet his newborn daughter." I put the phone away and looked directly at Tyler, my voice still quiet but now carrying a weight that seemed to fill the entire reception hall. "So yes, Tyler, I chose strangers over family dinners. I chose people like Maria and James over birthday parties and graduation ceremonies. And I would make that choice again, every single time, because that's what service means. That's what sacrifice means. That's what real responsibility looks like." The confrontation had reached a turning point, and everyone present seemed to sense it. Tyler stood frozen, clearly understanding that his attempt to humiliate me had instead revealed something about himself that he hadn't intended to share. The guests around us were no longer entertained. They were uncomfortable witnesses to a family dynamic that had turned toxic and personal. But I wasn't finished yet. Because Tyler had made this public, and because he had chosen to attack not just me, but the entire concept of military service, I was going to ensure that this conversation reached its logical conclusion. "You asked what I do day to day," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the now silent reception area. "Let me tell you exactly what I do." I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over the assembled guests. Tyler stood frozen, his earlier confidence completely evaporated, while Patricia looked as though she was calculating how to minimize the social damage of what was unfolding. The elegant reception hall, with its crystal chandeliers and flower arrangements, suddenly felt like a courtroom where judgment was about to be rendered. "I wake up at 0500 hours," I began, using the military time designation deliberately. "I spend my mornings reviewing intelligence reports that determine whether supply convoys can safely reach remote outposts where Marines are defending positions most Americans will never hear about. I analyze weather patterns, enemy movement reports, and equipment readiness assessments to decide whether 50 soldiers will have clean water, hot food, and ammunition when they need it most." Several guests were now paying complete attention, their earlier discomfort replaced by genuine curiosity about what they were learning. Tyler remained silent, perhaps beginning to understand that his knowledge of my actual work was far more limited than he had assumed. "I coordinate with engineers to design temporary bridges that can support armored vehicles while withstanding explosive attacks. I work with medical personnel to establish field hospitals that can operate under combat conditions. I manage logistics networks that span thousands of miles and involve dozens of different agencies, all while operating in environments where a single mistake can get people killed." I could see Kevin nodding slightly, his expression showing both pride and something that looked like regret. Patricia, meanwhile, was staring at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. "But that's just the routine part," I continued. "The part that happens when everything goes according to plan. The real work begins when plans fall apart, when equipment fails, when weather changes, when intelligence proves incorrect, when people start dying and everyone looks to you for solutions that don't exist in any manual. Tyler opened his mouth as if to speak, then apparently thought better of it. The audience around us had grown larger, with guests from other parts of the reception gradually migrating toward our conversation as word spread that something significant was happening. 3 years ago, I was responsible for evacuation operations when our forward operating base came under sustained mortar attack. The original evacuation plan assumed we would have helicopter support and clear weather. Instead, we had sandstorms and mechanical failures. 47 wounded Marines needed immediate medical attention, and I had to redesign our entire evacuation protocol in real time, while incoming fire was destroying our equipment. I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. I spent 14 hours coordinating with multiple agencies to establish alternative evacuation routes, using ground vehicles through terrain that hadn't been secured. I managed medical triage decisions that determined who would be evacuated first and who would have to wait. I allocated scarce resources among competing urgent needs while maintaining communication with command structures that were operating on incomplete information. The silence in the reception hall was now absolute. Even the catering staff had stopped moving, sensing that something important was happening that shouldn't be interrupted. All 47 Marines survived, I said simply. They went home to their families. Some of them had to relearn how to walk. Some of them carry scars they'll have forever. But they all went home alive because the evacuation worked, because the logistics held together, because people did their jobs under impossible conditions. Tyler's face had gone completely pale now. Whatever response he had been preparing was clearly inadequate for the reality I was describing. That's what I do, Tyler. That's what following orders looks like when the orders are to keep people alive under conditions that would terrify most civilians. That's what building something meaningful looks like when what you're building is the difference between life and death for people who volunteered to serve their country. Patricia stepped forward again, but this time her voice carried none of the dismissive authority she had used earlier. Rebecca, we had no idea. You never told us about these things. I turned to look at her directly, and for the first time that evening, I let some of my accumulated frustration show. I tried, Mom. For years I tried. But every time I started to explain what my work actually involved, you changed the subject. Every time I mentioned specific operations or challenges I was facing, you found ways to redirect the conversation to Tyler's latest business success, or Kevin's coffee shop expansion. The accusation hung in the air between us, and I could see from Patricia's expression that she was beginning to recognize the truth in what I was saying. You didn't want to hear about my work because it complicated the narrative you had created about my choices. It was easier to believe that I was being selfish and irresponsible than to acknowledge that I was doing something difficult and important that you didn't understand. Several guests were now exchanging glances that suggested they were beginning to see this family dynamic in a very different light. What had started as Tyler's entertainment was becoming an education for everyone present about assumptions, respect, and the real meaning of service. But here's what really hurts, I continued, my voice growing stronger as I finally gave voice to feelings I had been suppressing for years. It's not that you didn't understand my work, it's that you never tried to understand it, you never asked meaningful questions. You never showed genuine interest in the most important aspects of my life. Tyler finally found his voice again, but it came out as a whisper. We were proud of you. We told people you were in the military. You told people I was in the military the same way you might mention that I had moved to another state for a job, I replied. As a fact to be acknowledged and then moved past as quickly as possible. You never talked about what I was actually accomplishing. You never shared the letters I sent describing the projects I was working on. You never mentioned the commendations I received or the operations I led. I could see Amanda across the room now, clearly aware that something significant was happening and gradually making her way toward our group. Her expression showed concern but also curiosity about what was causing such an intense conversation at her wedding reception. And the worst part, I continued, is that you used my physical absence to justify your emotional absence. You stopped treating me like a member of this family long before I stopped being able to attend family events. You stopped including me in decisions, stopped asking for my input, stopped treating my opinions as valuable. Kevin spoke for the first time since the confrontation had begun, his voice quiet but clear. "She's right. We did that. We all did that." The admission seemed to surprise everyone, including Kevin himself. But having spoken, he seemed to find the courage to continue. "We made Rebecca's service about us. About what we were missing. About how her choices affected us. We never really tried to understand what she was going through, what she was accomplishing, what she needed from us." Tyler looked at Kevin with an expression of betrayal, clearly not expecting this alliance. But Kevin's support seemed to give me strength to continue with what I needed to say. "Tyler, you want to talk about building something meaningful? Let me tell you about the school I helped design in Kandahar province. It serves 800 children who had never had access to education before. The construction had to be completed under constant security threats, using materials that could be transported through areas controlled by insurgents, with backup plans for every system in case of attacks." I was warming to my theme now, years of suppressed pride and frustration finally finding their voice. The engineering challenges alone would have impressed Dad. We had to create a structure that could withstand explosive attacks while remaining welcoming to children. We had to design water and electrical systems that could operate independently of the regional infrastructure. We had to plan for medical emergencies, security protocols, and evacuation procedures while maintaining an environment where kids could learn and play safely. Several guests were now openly staring at me with expressions of amazement, clearly having no idea that such projects even existed, much less that someone they were having cocktails with had been responsible for designing and implementing them. The project took 18 months to complete. I managed teams of engineers, security specialists, educators, and local contractors. I coordinated with tribal leaders, government officials, and military commanders. I solved problems that ranged from concrete that could set properly in extreme heat to security systems that could protect children without making them feel like prisoners. Tyler was now slumped against the fireplace mantel, his earlier aggressive posture completely abandoned. The contrast between his confident mockery of 30 minutes earlier and his current deflated silence was stark and obvious to everyone present. When the school opened, 800 children attended classes on the first day. 800 kids who had never held a pencil before, who had never seen the inside of a classroom, who had never imagined that education was something that could belong to them. I paused, letting the image settle in everyone's minds. That school is still operating today. Those children are now teenagers, many of them planning to attend university. Some of them want to become teachers themselves. Others want to be doctors, engineers, or business leaders. Their lives were fundamentally changed by a project that I designed and implemented while you were here complaining that I wasn't attending enough family dinners. The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Tyler looked as though he wanted to disappear entirely, while Patricia seemed to be struggling with emotions she couldn't quite name. "So when you ask me what I've built," I concluded, "remember that some of us build with bullets flying overhead. Some of us build knowing that our work might be destroyed tomorrow by people who hate the very idea of progress. Some of us build for children we'll never meet, in places we'll never visit again, because building something meaningful isn't always about personal profit or family recognition." Amanda had finally reached our group, and her presence seemed to break the spell that had held everyone frozen during my speech. She looked around at the faces surrounding her, clearly trying to understand what had transpired and why her wedding reception had become the site of such an intense confrontation. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her voice carrying the kind of diplomatic caution that suggested she could sense the emotional minefield she had just entered. Tyler straightened up slightly, clearly trying to regain some composure in front of his new wife. "We were just having a family discussion," he said, his voice lacking any conviction. Amanda looked at him for a moment, then at me, then at the circle of uncomfortable guests who were clearly witnessing the aftermath of something significant. Her expression suggested that she was rapidly calculating the social dynamics at play and coming to some conclusions about what had actually been happening. "Rebecca," she said, turning to address me directly, "I don't think we've had a chance to really talk yet today. I'd love to hear more about your work." The invitation was simple, polite, and completely devastating to whatever remained of Tyler's position. His new wife, on their wedding day, in front of all their guests, had just publicly expressed genuine interest in learning about the military service that he had spent the last hour dismissing as meaningless. Amanda Rodriguez had always been different from the usual women Tyler dated, where his previous relationships had been with country club daughters or business networking contacts. Amanda came from a working-class family in Hartford. Her father, Miguel, was a retired police sergeant, and her mother, Elena, worked as a high school guidance counselor. Amanda herself had earned her nursing degree while working nights at a local hospital to pay for school, eventually specializing in trauma care at Connecticut's busiest emergency department. What Tyler didn't know, what none of the Thompson family knew, was that Amanda's path to nursing had been inspired by her older brother Carlos, who had served 2 tours in Iraq as a combat medic before being killed by a roadside bomb in Fallujah. Carlos Rodriguez had died trying to reach wounded soldiers under fire, and his sacrifice had shaped Amanda's understanding of service, courage, and the real cost of freedom. Amanda had met Tyler at a charity fundraiser for veterans' medical care, an event she attended religiously every year in Carlos's memory. Tyler had been there representing Thompson Construction's corporate sponsorship, networking with potential clients while she had been volunteering to serve meals to disabled veterans. Their courtship had been built on Tyler's careful presentation of himself as someone who understood and respected military families, though Amanda had gradually begun to notice gaps between his stated values and his actual behavior. She had been particularly troubled by Tyler's dismissive comments about his sister Rebecca over the months of their engagement. Whenever Amanda asked about Rebecca's military service or suggested including military traditions in their wedding ceremony, Tyler had deflected with jokes about his sister's phase, or her need for attention. Amanda had found these responses increasingly uncomfortable, especially given her own family's experience with military loss. Now, standing in the middle of her wedding reception and observing the aftermath of what was clearly a significant confrontation, Amanda was beginning to piece together a picture that made her deeply uncomfortable. The woman standing before her, composed and dignified despite obvious emotional stress, bore no resemblance to the irresponsible attention seeker Tyler had described. "I'd be honored to tell you about my work," Rebecca replied to Amanda's invitation, her voice still carrying the quiet authority that had dominated the conversation for the past hour. "But first, I think there's something you should know about your new husband's understanding of military service." Tyler's face went completely white. "Rebecca, don't do this. Not here. Not now." But Amanda held up a hand to stop him, her expression showing the kind of focused attention that came from years of making life-and-death decisions in emergency rooms. "No, Tyler. I want to hear this. All of it." The circle of guests had grown even larger, with nearly half the reception now clustered around our group. Some people were recording on their phones, clearly recognizing that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years. Others looked desperately uncomfortable but seemed unable to leave, trapped by social convention and morbid curiosity. Rebecca looked directly at Amanda, and something in her expression shifted. The military officer's composure remained, but there was also something warmer, more personal. "Amanda, may I ask what inspired you to become a trauma nurse?" The question seemed to surprise Amanda, but she answered without hesitation. "My brother Carlos. He was a combat medic who died in Iraq trying to save wounded soldiers." A ripple went through the assembled guests as this information registered. Tyler's face showed shock. Clearly, this was not something Amanda had shared with his family during their engagement. Rebecca nodded slowly, her expression showing both understanding and respect. "Carlos Rodriguez. Specialist, 1st Armored Division. Killed in action March 15, 2008, in Fallujah." The silence that followed was absolute and profound. Amanda's face went completely still, her eyes widening as she processed what Rebecca had just said. "How do you know that?" Amanda whispered. Rebecca reached into her purse again, this time pulling out a small, worn photograph. She handed it to Amanda with careful reverence. "Because I was there. I was the logistics officer who coordinated the medical evacuation attempt. I helped write the after-action report. And I was one of the people who recommended your brother for the Bronze Star with Valor that he received posthumously. Amanda stared at the photograph, which showed a young man in military fatigues standing beside a military ambulance. Her hands began to shake as she recognized her brother's face, younger than she remembered, but unmistakably Carlos. "This is impossible," Tyler said, his voice cracking slightly. "You can't have. This is some kind of coincidence." Rebecca turned to look at him, and for the first time that evening her expression showed something close to pity. "Tyler, your future wife's brother died trying to save Marines under my command. The evacuation convoy that was trying to reach them was organized and deployed under my direct supervision. I have carried the weight of that day for 16 years." Amanda was now staring at Rebecca with an expression that combined grief, amazement, and something approaching awe. "You were there when he died?" "I was in the command post coordinating the rescue operation," Rebecca confirmed. "Carlos and his team were trying to reach a patrol that had been hit by an IED. They came under fire while attempting to evacuate casualties. Carlos was struck while trying to drag a wounded Marine to safety." Tears were now streaming down Amanda's face, but she made no move to wipe them away. "Tell me about him. Tell me what happened." Rebecca's voice took on a different quality now, softer, but somehow more intense. "Your brother saved 4 lives that day before he was killed. The Marine he was trying to reach when he was hit, Corporal Jennifer Hayes, survived because Carlos got her to the evacuation point. She's now a teacher in Oregon with 2 children. She sends me a Christmas card every year with photos of her family." The emotional weight of this revelation was affecting everyone present. Several guests were openly crying, while others stood in stunned silence as they processed what they were learning. "Carlos was the bravest person I've ever served with," Rebecca continued. "When the initial evacuation convoy came under fire, most people would have taken cover and waited for reinforcements. Your brother ran toward the danger because he knew that every second mattered for the wounded Marines." Amanda was sobbing now, but she managed to speak through her tears. "He always said that. He used to tell me that every second mattered when someone was hurt." "He was right," Rebecca said simply, "and he lived by those words. The 4 Marines who survived that day are alive because your brother understood that service means putting other people's lives ahead of your own comfort, your own safety, your own survival." Tyler stood frozen, clearly struggling to process the fact that his dismissive comments about military service had been made in front of a woman whose brother had died serving his country, and whose sacrifice had been witnessed by the very sister he had been mocking. "Amanda," Rebecca said, her voice gentle but carrying undeniable authority, "your brother died a hero. Not because someone gave him a medal, but because he made a choice that defined who he was as a person. He chose to run toward danger to save people he had never met before that day. People who mattered to him only because they were fellow human beings in need." The bride was now leaning against Jennifer Collins for support, her carefully styled hair and makeup destroyed by tears, but her attention completely focused on Rebecca's words. "That's what real service looks like," Rebecca continued, her voice growing stronger again. "It's not about glory or recognition or building your reputation. It's about being willing to sacrifice everything you have for people who might never know your name, who might never be able to thank you, who might never understand the cost of what you gave up for them." She turned to look directly at Tyler, and her expression hardened again. "Your brother-in-law died embodying the values that you spent this evening mocking. He gave his life demonstrating the kind of courage and selflessness that you dismissed as playing dress-up and seeking attention." Tyler looked as though he might collapse. The contrast between his earlier confident mockery and his current recognition of what he had actually been attacking was devastating and obvious to everyone present. "Carlos Rodriguez was 24 years old when he died," Rebecca continued, her voice now carrying across the entire reception hall. "He had been accepted to medical school and planned to become a doctor after his military service. He wanted to specialize in emergency medicine so he could continue helping people in crisis situations." Amanda nodded through her tears. "He told me that. He said he wanted to save lives both in the military and as a civilian. He would have been an excellent doctor," Rebecca said with absolute conviction. "The skills he demonstrated as a combat medic, the courage he showed under fire, the dedication he had to serving others. Those are exactly the qualities that make great emergency physicians. The emotional impact of learning these details about her brother was clearly overwhelming Amanda, but she seemed determined to hear everything Rebecca could tell her. "There's something else you should know," Rebecca said, reaching into her purse one more time. She pulled out a small metal object and held it out to Amanda. "This belonged to your brother. It was found after the attack, and I've been carrying it ever since, hoping someday I would find a way to return it to his family." Amanda took the object with trembling hands. It was a small silver cross on a chain, tarnished with age but still clearly recognizable as jewelry that had been worn regularly. "He wore this every day," Amanda whispered. "Our grandmother gave it to him before his first deployment." "He was wearing it when he died," Rebecca confirmed. "I thought his family should have it back." The sight of her dead brother's necklace was clearly the final emotional blow for Amanda. She clutched the cross to her chest and broke down completely, her sobs echoing through the now silent reception hall. But then, through her tears, she did something that no one expected. She looked up at Rebecca, and despite her emotional state, her voice was clear and strong. "You carried this for 16 years? You've been looking for a way to return it to us for 16 years? Rebecca nodded. "I've thought about your family often. I've wondered how you were coping with the loss, whether you understood how much your brother's sacrifice meant, whether you knew that he died saving lives." Amanda stood up straighter, wiping her face with her hands. She looked around at the assembled guests, then at Tyler, then at Patricia and Kevin. When she spoke, her voice carried the kind of authority that comes from absolute moral clarity. "Tyler," she said, and there was something in her tone that made everyone present pay attention. "Do you understand what just happened here?" Tyler opened his mouth, but no words came out. He seemed to be struggling with concepts too large for him to process. "Your sister," Amanda continued, "has been carrying a piece of my dead brother for 16 years, waiting for a chance to return it to his family. She witnessed his death. She helped coordinate the operation that tried to save him. She's carried the memory of his sacrifice for over a decade." The bride was now facing Tyler directly, and despite her tear-stained makeup and ruined hairstyle, she commanded the attention of everyone present. "And you," she said, her voice growing stronger, "you chose to spend your wedding reception mocking her service, dismissing her sacrifices, and treating her dedication as a joke." Tyler looked as though he wanted to disappear. Several guests were now openly staring at him with expressions of disgust and disbelief. "You told me your sister was irresponsible and selfish," Amanda continued. "You said she was seeking attention and avoiding real work. You described her military service as playing dress-up and having adventures." Each accusation landed with visible impact. Tyler's earlier confidence had been completely shattered, replaced by the dawning recognition of how badly he had misjudged both his sister and his new wife's likely reaction to his behavior. "But what I see," Amanda said, her voice now carrying across the entire reception hall, "is a woman who has dedicated her life to serving others, who has made sacrifices you can't even imagine, who has carried the memory of fallen soldiers for years, and who brought my brother's necklace to return it to his family." She turned to look directly at Rebecca, and what she did next stunned everyone present. Amanda Rodriguez, still wearing her white wedding gown, dropped to one knee in front of Rebecca Thompson. Her head bowed, her voice clear and strong, she said the words that would echo through the reception hall and change everything. "Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Thompson, ma'am. It's an honor to meet you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for serving with my brother. Thank you for carrying his memory. Thank you for bringing him home to us." The silence that followed was profound and sacred. 200 wedding guests stood motionless as they witnessed a moment of recognition, respect, and gratitude that transcended social convention and family drama. Rebecca stood perfectly still for a moment, clearly moved by Amanda's gesture but maintaining her military bearing. Then, gently, she reached down and helped Amanda to her feet. "The honor is mine," Rebecca said quietly. "Your brother was a remarkable man, and his sacrifice saved lives. I'm grateful I could finally return this to his family." Amanda stood, still holding her brother's cross, and turned to face the assembled guests. When she spoke, her voice carried the kind of authority that comes from absolute moral conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, I want you all to meet Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Thompson, United States Marine Corps. She has served our country with distinction for 15 years, including 3 combat deployments. She has built schools and hospitals in war zones. She has saved lives under fire. She has carried the memory of fallen soldiers and worked to honor their sacrifice. The applause that began was tentative at first, but it quickly grew into something thunderous and sustained. Guests who had been uncomfortably witnessing family drama suddenly understood that they were in the presence of someone whose service and sacrifice deserved their respect and gratitude. Rebecca stood at attention, accepting the recognition with the dignity befitting her rank and service. But her eyes were focused on Amanda, the young woman who had chosen to honor military service on her wedding day, even when it meant publicly contradicting her new husband. Tyler stood alone beside the fireplace, isolated by his own earlier words and actions. The man who had confidently mocked his sister's service now faced the recognition that his new wife understood and valued exactly the qualities he had dismissed. Patricia approached Rebecca slowly, her earlier defensive attitude completely abandoned. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with what sounded like years of suppressed regret. "Rebecca," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology, we all do. We never understood, we never tried to understand." Kevin nodded in agreement, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "We failed you, Becca. We failed to see who you really are and what you've accomplished." But it was Amanda who provided the final word on the evening's events. Still holding her brother's cross, still wearing her wedding dress, she looked around at the assembled guests and spoke with complete conviction. "Today was supposed to be about celebrating love and family," she said. "Instead, it became about something more important. It became about recognizing real courage, real sacrifice, and real service. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson has shown us what those words actually mean." She turned to look at Tyler one last time, and her expression was sad but resolute. "I married you because I thought you understood and respected the values my family holds dear. Tonight I learned that the person who truly embodies those values is the sister you've been treating as an embarrassment." The reception continued, but everything had changed. Guests approached Rebecca throughout the evening, thanking her for her service and asking about her experiences. Several veterans present introduced themselves and shared their own stories. Amanda spent much of the night beside Rebecca, learning about her brother's final days and the impact of his sacrifice. Tyler retreated to a corner table with his groomsmen, clearly struggling to process how completely his attempt to humiliate his sister had backfired. The man who had started the evening as the confident center of attention ended it isolated and diminished, forced to confront the reality of his own character in comparison to the sister he had dismissed. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Amanda approached Rebecca one final time. The bride was still wearing her wedding dress, but she had taken off her heels and let down her hair. She looked tired but somehow more alive than she had all day. "Rebecca," she said, "I want you to know that learning about Carlos tonight, getting his cross back, understanding what really happened, it means everything to me. You've given me a gift I never expected to receive." Rebecca nodded, her expression showing both gratitude and something that looked like relief. "Your brother deserved to be remembered as the hero he was. I'm glad I could finally tell his story to someone who would understand what it meant." They embraced, 2 women connected by loss, service, and the recognition that some bonds transcend family relationships and social expectations. As Rebecca prepared to leave the reception, she walked past Tyler one last time. He looked up at her, his face showing a mixture of shame and confusion. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "I don't know what to say." She stopped and looked down at him, her expression not unkind but absolutely clear. "Then don't say anything, Tyler. Just remember this night. Remember what you learned about the difference between real service and self-service. Remember what your new wife taught you about respect and recognition. And remember that some things matter more than family business and social status." She turned and walked away, leaving Tyler to contemplate the wreckage of his own making. Rebecca Thompson drove home to her small apartment in Hartford that night, carrying something she hadn't possessed in years: the recognition that her choices, her service, and her sacrifices had value and meaning beyond her own understanding. She had finally found someone who understood what service really meant, and ironically, it wasn't a member of her own family. The wedding that was supposed to celebrate Tyler and Amanda's union instead became the moment when Rebecca Thompson was finally seen and valued for who she truly was. A soldier, a leader, and a woman whose dedication to service had shaped her into someone worthy of respect and admiration. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.